The high G turn crushed her lungs, blurring the world outside the cockpit into a green-black smear. Alarms screamed, a polite fiction. The real threat was the silence on the comms. Static. Pop. "Viper, this is Jester. We are Winchester on Stinger." I say again, "Winchester. We have 6 bogies inbound, hot. Where is your support?" The voice was rough, seasoned, and edged with a controlled panic that tightened her grip on the stick. She ignored the tactical data link, already saturated. Her systems were tracking 19 hostile signatures, not 6. "Jester, Viper, stand by," she managed, her own voice betraying nothing, not even the spike of adrenaline that tasted like copper. She eased the pressure, leveling the experimental craft just above the jagged ridgeline. Below, green tracers stitched the dark. Commander Thorne's SEAL team, pinned, pop, static. "Viper, what is that thing? It's not—" A new tone locked in her helmet. "Missile launch. Not at her. At the ground team." She didn't ask for clearance. She thumbed the release. The aircraft didn't fire. It released a silent countermeasure that bloomed like dark ink, swallowing the missile's tracking. Then she spoke, her voice lethally calm, a whisper in the chaos. "Jester, clear the net. Going offensive." 72 hours earlier, Kandahar Airfield, CIC briefing room. The smell of stale coffee and ozone from the CIC projectors hung thick in the pressurized air. Major Elena Rivas, call sign Viper, kept her hands clasped loosely behind her back, her posture a study in professional stillness. Across the briefing table, Commander Thorne, call sign Jester, was the opposite. He radiated a kinetic impatience, a coiled energy that seemed to suck the oxygen from the room. His scarred knuckles, wrapped around a chipped ceramic mug, were white. He was a SEAL commander. He was used to assets he understood. A-10s that ripped the sky with 30mm cannons. Apaches that rained hellfire. He was not used to her, or the X-02 Falcon she flew. "Major," Thorne began, his voice a low rasp. He didn't look at her, his eyes fixed on the map overlay. "I've read the brief. I've read the specs. And I'm telling you, this is a mistake." Rivas maintained her silence. It was a calculated choice. He wasn't looking for an argument. He was looking for a target. "My men are infiltrating 80 clicks into hostile territory. They need KS, real KS, not this." He waved a dismissive hand at the holographic render of the Falcon, which spun silently in the room's center. "This glass cannon. I need ordnance on target, Major, not a science experiment." The insult, glass cannon, was precise. It was designed to sting, to imply fragility. It implied she, the pilot, was fragile. A familiar coldness settled in her stomach. The ghost of the simulation failure, the red screen glare of mission failed, flickered at the edge of her mind. She unclasped her hands, resting them on the table's edge. "The Falcon's ordnance is precise, Commander, and its stealth capability ensures I can provide overwatch without escalating the situation." "Escalating," Thorne scoffed, finally looking at her. His eyes were the color of cold seawater. "We're not worried about escalating, Major. We're worried about surviving. My team doesn't need precise. They need overwhelming." He pushed a data tablet across the table. "This data link integration you're proposing, it's too complex. My men don't need another tablet. They need to keep their eyes on the rocks." He stood, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. The briefing was over. "Stay high, Major. Stay quiet. And do not get in the way. We'll handle the rest." The click of his pen hitting the table was sharp, final. He didn't wait for her acknowledgement. He simply walked out, his team flanking him, leaving a vacuum in his wake. Rivas stood alone in the CIC. The hologram of the Falcon continued its silent, perfect rotation. He had dismissed her. He saw her as just another piece of equipment, unreliable, untested, and unwanted. She looked down at her own hands. Steady. She had absorbed his skepticism, his professional contempt, and filed it away. Her fortitude wasn't in arguing with a man like Thorne. It was in preparation. It was in competence. She picked up the tablet he had rejected. His refusal forced her hand. She would be isolated, relying solely on her own systems, her own eyes. A cold, grim clarity settled over her. She didn't need his permission. She just needed to be right. The hangar was a sterile cathedral of white light and cold air. The X-02 Falcon sat in the center, less an aircraft than a sculpted piece of obsidian geometry. It absorbed the light, promising nothing. Major Elena Rivas was already halfway through the external checks when Kalen, the lead civilian tech, held up a datapad. His brow was furrowed. Viper, hold a minute. Panel C14. The acoustic sensor feed is showing a 0.02 fluctuation. It's intermittent. Rivas stopped, her glove resting on the Falcon's skin. It was cold, smooth as glass. She felt the vibration of the hangar's distant generators through her fingertips. 0.02 is within tolerance, she said, her voice flat. It is, Kalen pressed, walking closer. He was young, brilliant, and perpetually cautious. But the last diagnostic didn't show it. It could be acoustic interference from the new pylon mount, or it could be the processor prepping for a cascade failure. Standard procedure is a full cold reboot diagnostic. 90 minutes max. 90 minutes. Thorne's team would be at their insertion point in 60. She would miss the launch window. Kalen's words faded, replaced by a different sound. A synthesized beep. The memory hit her, sharp and unwelcome. The sim bay. The sweat trickling down her neck. The same recycled air. A digital ghost on her screen. An anomalous sensor reading she had dismissed as interference. A hesitant call. She had followed protocol. She had held back, waiting for PID. The screen had flashed, a blinding crimson. Mission failed, Jester Team Kia. It wasn't real, but the hollowed-out feeling in her chest, the professional shame, had been. She had played it safe, by the book. And the book had killed them. Her hand hovered over the diagnostic port on the fuselage, the port Kalen was waiting for her to access. The tremor in her fingers was almost imperceptible. Not again. Not this time. Viper? Elena? Kalen's voice pulled her back. She looked at him. Her eyes, dark and focused, revealed nothing of the memory. The fluctuation isn't the processor, she said. The certainty in her voice was absolute, forged in the failure of the simulation. She knew this system better than he did. She had helped design the sensor suite. Its resonance from the pylon mount, just like you said. The harmonics are new. The system is just learning to filter it. We can't know that without the diag. I'm flying. She cut him off, not unkindly, but with a finality that left no room for debate. She trusted her analysis of the machine more than she trusted a cautious protocol. This was not the simulation. This was not a ghost. This was a 0.02 fluctuation, and she was accepting the risk. She turned and climbed the ladder, not waiting for his reply. The decision was made. The faint tremor in her hand was gone. She settled into the ejection seat, the cockpit enveloping her. The smell of clean electronics and recycled oxygen was comforting, familiar. She began the pre-flight sequence, her movements economical and precise. Switches clicked. Systems came online, the cockpit filling with the soft green glow of the interface. She sealed the canopy. The hiss of the pressurized seal cut her off from the hangar, from Kalen, from the world. The cockpit darkened, lit only by the data scrolling across her visor. She was sealed inside her cage, a cage of glass and steel and classified technology. Her comms crackled. "Tower, this is Viper. Requesting taxi to active." A pause. "Viper, Tower. You are cleared. Godspeed, Major." The Falcon's turbines spooled with a low, tearing whine. She eased the throttle forward, and the aircraft rolled, a silent shadow moving into the pre-dawn darkness of Kandahar. 40,000 feet. The world was a vast, cold bowl of stars above and fractured darkness below. Rivas flew the Falcon in a lazy, pre-programmed figure 8, a ghost in the stratosphere. Her cockpit was a bubble of calm. The soft, synthesized hiss of the oxygen mask was the only sound. Her screens were passive, drinking in data. On the tactical display, 6 green icons, tagged Jester, moved with disciplined precision along a barren ridgeline. Thorn. She watched his team's biometrics. Heart rates steady, movement fluid. They were professionals, and she was their invisible guardian. Her primary directive, burned into her mind by the mission planners, was absolute MCON, emission control. She was to remain a black hole in the electronic spectrum. No radar, no active comms, not even a data link squirt unless Thorn initiated. The Falcon's value was its invisibility. To speak was to reveal its existence. The green icons reached the mouth of the Wadi al-Assad, the Lion's Gullet, a deep, twisting canyon that would shield them from sight on their final approach. It would also shield them from her. One by one, the green icons winked out as they descended below the canyon rim. First Jester 1, Thorn, then 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Her screen was empty. A profound, suffocating silence filled the cockpit. It was no longer just radio silence. It was sensor silence. The dead zone. She had lost them. Her eyes scanned the empty tactical map. The hiss of her breathing suddenly felt too loud. She fought the urge to break MCON. Just one narrow band LPI sweep. One ping to relock their positions, to know they were still moving. Her hand tightened on the throttle, her thumb brushing the LPI trigger. No. Thorn's parting words. Stay high. Stay quiet. He didn't trust her. If she broke silence now, she would confirm his every doubt. She would be the nervous, trigger-happy rookie in the science experiment. She forced her hand away from the trigger. She would wait. Her discipline had to be stronger than her anxiety. She endured the agonizing void, the absolute lack of data. 5 minutes passed. 6. Her gaze drifted to the spectrum analyzer, the one system that was always listening. It was a waterfall of digital noise, the ambient radio chatter of the entire region. Nothing, just static. 7 minutes. A spike. It was faint, razor-thin, and gone in less than a second. A burst transmission, not Jester. The frequency was wrong, unencrypted, high band. Her fingers flew across the console, isolating the frequency, cross-referencing the signal profile. It wasn't local militia. It was military grade. It came from inside the wadi. The red spike flashed again, longer this time. They're talking. They knew. They hadn't seen her, but they knew Jester was in the canyon. The infiltration was compromised. They were walking into an ambush. The cold dread from the simulation returned, sharp and acidic. They're walking into it. She couldn't raise Thorn. He was in the dead zone. She couldn't warn him. She watched the mouth of the canyon, a black, jagged tear in the earth. Any second the gunfire would start. Any second she would be too late. Then, a flicker. One green icon, Jester 1. Thorn had emerged from the far end of the wadi, another, Jester 2. The enemy chatter on the spectrum analyzer tripled in volume. The trap was set, and Jester was walking right out of it, into the open. Rivas broke MCON. 2 clicks of the mic. A prearranged signal, contact imminent. AFO, pause. Then Thorn's voice, rough and breathless. Copy! Contact! The night erupted. Gunfire stitched the dark, a frantic crackle over the net, punctuated by the deep thump of an RPG. The battle locked into focus. Rivas dropped the Falcon into a tight, descending orbit, her sensors peeling back the layers of darkness. Jester team was pinned behind a low stone wall, a sheep pen, ancient and crumbling. Green tracers from 4 enemy positions hammered their cover. Viper, this is Jester! Thorn's voice was strained, breathless over the roar of gunfire. I have an RPG team, East Ridge, 200 meters from my posts. They're dialing us in. I need them gone now. Rivas's eyes were already there. Her thermal overlay painted the world in ghostly shades of white and black. She saw the RPG team. 3 men, huddled around a launcher on a rocky outcrop. Beside them, nestled against the same outcrop, was a small stone structure, a shepherd's hut, and inside it, her sensors painted 3 small, white-hot signatures, non-combatants. The thermal bloom was unmistakable, children. The word flashed, unbidden, cold, and absolute. Jester, be advised, Rivas said, her voice a calm counterpoint to the chaos. Target is danger close to a structure containing non-combatants. I cannot PID the RPG team as a clean target. The ROE was clear. Positive identification, PID, and collateral damage estimation, CDE. She could not fire on a target without 100% certainty she would only hit the target. A rocket-propelled grenade shrieked past Thorn's position, detonating against the rocks behind him. The crack was sharp, even over the comms. I don't give a damn about the structure, Viper, Thorn roared. My men are exposed. Danger close, I accept the risk. Drop! I say again, drop! He was screaming for the strike. He was giving her the authority, washing his hands of the consequence. But the ROE wasn't his to waive. It was hers to uphold. The simulation failure flashed again. Hesitation, protocol, failure. But this wasn't hesitation. This was a choice. Jester, I cannot, she said. The decision was instant, cold, and final. ROE prohibits. Thorn's reply was a stream of curses, drowned out by another RPG launch. Rivas's hands moved, retasking the weapon system. She bypassed the high-explosive missiles. She bypassed the cannons. She selected the scalpel pod, a rack of non-explosive tungsten kinetic rods. She centered the crosshairs, not on the RPG team, but on the sheer rock face 20 feet above them. Jester, stand by for fragmentation, she whispered, more to herself than to him. She thumbed the release. There was no explosion, just a faint thump from the Falcon's belly, a sound lost in the wind. 3 seconds later, the kinetic rod struck the cliff. It shattered the rock, turning solid stone into a localized avalanche of razor-sharp shale and debris. The rockslide buried the RPG team. Not a kill, perhaps, but an entombment. The firing stopped instantly. Silence fell on the net, broken only by Thorn's ragged breathing. What the hell was that, Viper? He demanded, his voice low, furious. That was nothing. You just painted a target on us for nothing. The RPG team is suppressed, Jester, Rivas replied, her voice level. The threat is neutralized. Move. She didn't wait for his response. She pulled the Falcon up, climbing back to the cold safety of the upper atmosphere. Jester team used the moment, scrambling from their compromised cover and vanishing into a dry riverbed. But the damage was done. Thorn was alive, but his fury and his absolute distrust of her were now cemented in the cold mountain air. She had made the right call, and in doing so, she had lost her only ally. Jester team was moving fast, deeper into the warren of canyons, but the enemy was moving faster. Rivas watched the tactical display, a cold knot tightening in her gut. The red icons, enemy infantry, weren't chasing. They were leading. They were cutting off the exfil route, flowing around Jester's position with a coordinated precision that belied Thorn's local militia assessment. This was a planned envelopment. They knew where Jester was, and they knew where Jester was going. "Jester, Viper," she kept her voice level, filtering out the urgency. "I show significant enemy movement flanking you northeast. They are anticipating your path to LZ Bravo. You need to reroute." Thorn's reply was clipped, static-laced. "Copy, Viper. We see 'em. How do they know? We're ghosts." How do they know? The question echoed her own. Her screens were clean. Her passive sensors, designed to drink in the faintest electronic or thermal whispers, showed nothing but Jester and the ground troops. She was listening with the most sophisticated ears on the planet, and she heard no spotter. No radio chatter coordinating the ambush. The battlefield was too clean. Her gaze fell on the LPI radar panel. Low probability of intercept. A single active sweep. It was a massive risk. It was the one thing, other than firing a weapon, that could compromise her MCON. If this enemy was sophisticated enough to coordinate this ambush, they were sophisticated enough to have electronic support measures. They might detect the sweep. They might know, definitively, that a high-value asset was watching them. But the alternative was watching Jester walk into a kill box, blind. Her fingers drummed on the console. The simulation failure ghost whispered, "You waited. You followed protocol. They died." She would not wait. This was not an impulsive act. It was a calculated necessity. She trusted her systems, but she trusted her analysis of their absence more. Risk it. She activated the LPI. Her thumb depressed the trigger. A single pencil-thin beam of energy, lasting less than a millisecond, lanced down from the Falcon, sweeping the airspace directly above Jester team. The cockpit pinged, a high-pitched, faint electronic ping. A return. Her eyes snapped to the display. There. A single, fast-moving icon 10,000 feet above the canyon floor. Not a fighter. Not a helicopter. The return was too small. The material signature too faint. It was painted with radar-absorbent material. An advanced ISR drone. It was hovering, its sensors locked onto Thorn's team, feeding a perfect, real-time picture to the ground forces. That was the unseen enemy. That was their spotter. A cold, sharp realization hit her. They weren't just fighting militia. They were fighting someone with next-generation technology. Before Rivas could lock it, before she could even task a weapon, the icon vanished. It had detected her LPI sweep. The enemy drone hadn't just been watching Jester. It had been listening. And now it knew, without a doubt, that it was not alone in the sky. The red icons on the ground stopped moving. They went quiet. They were changing tactics. "Jester," Rivas said, her voice grim. "We have a problem. They know we're here." "Jester, LZ Bravo is a kill box," Rivas stated, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. "The enemy controls the high ground. I'm rerouting you to an alternate. LZ Kilo. It's 5 clicks west." A burst of static. "Viper, There is no viable path to Kilo from here. That's a sheer cliff face. Thorn's voice was ragged, exhausted, and losing its edge of command. Negative, Jester. My sensors show a goat path. Narrow, but stable. It traverses the cliff face 200 feet below the summit. It's your only way out. Another pause. Longer this time. The sound of heavy breathing. Copy. Viper, we're moving. Talk us in. The words sent a cold spike of adrenaline through her. Talk us in. This was not her role. She was a pilot, an engineer. She interfaced with systems. Her job was to observe, analyze, and deploy ordnance. She was not a comforting voice, not a guide in the dark. The intimacy of it, the direct verbal responsibility for their lives, felt foreign, invasive. She forced her breathing to slow, syncing it with the hiss of her oxygen mask. She pushed the Falcon into a higher, tighter orbit, her sensor pod locked onto the cliff face. On her display, the goat path was a faint, gray-white ribbon against the absolute black of the canyon. The 6 green heat sigs of Jester team were clustered at the entrance, hesitant. Jester, proceed, she said. Her throat was dry. She forced her voice into a monotone, a calm instrument. Path is 3 feet wide for the first 50 meters. Single file. Maintain 5-meter spacing. Copy, Thorn rasped. The green icons began to move. She watched them, her entire world compressed into those 6 flickering lights. She was no longer a pilot flying an aircraft. She was a lifeline, a thread of data and calm, spanning a canyon. Jester 1, lead. Jester 2, hold pace. She talked them through every step. The silence between her commands was deafening, filled only by the crackle of wind against Thorn's open mic. Jester 3, watch your footing. Loose shale, your left. Copy. She was fully integrated into their movement, their survival. This was a new kind of pressure, heavier than G-forces, more demanding than combat. The burden of command she never wanted. One misspoken word, one sensor lag. A sudden clatter of falling rock burst over the comms. Her eyes snapped to the display. Jester 4. The green icon wavered, slipping from the gray-white ribbon of the path. He was on the edge. Jester 4, stop, she commanded. Her voice did not rise. It did not change. It cut through the static, absolute. The green icon froze, hovering over the black void. She could hear his sharp, panicked breathing over the net. Right foot, Rivas said, her tone the auditory equivalent of a surgeon's scalpel. 6 inches left. There is a ledge. Find it. A pause. The icon shifted. Good. Anchor. The icon stabilized, moving back onto the path. Breathe, Jester 4. You are stable. Jester 3, move up. The team resumed its slow, agonizing crawl. No one spoke. No one acknowledged what had just happened. But the cadence of their movement was different. They were locked onto her voice. She felt the shift. Thorn's grudging compliance had become absolute reliance. She had asserted a quiet, micro-level command, and they had accepted it. She guided them for another 20 minutes, her words the only thing holding them to the side of the mountain. Ahead, 100 meters, I show a recess, a small cave system. You can hold there. Copy, Viper. Thorn's voice was hollowed out, all arrogance gone, just exhaustion. Moving. The last icon, Jester 6, slipped into the cave. Rivas finally allowed her shoulders, locked tight for half an hour, to release. The relief was short-lived. Her threat display pinged. The same high-frequency signature she had seen before. The enemy drone was back, and it wasn't alone. The drone returned, but it was no longer just a spotter. It was a shepherd. Rivas's tactical display lit up. 6 new icons, then 12, split off from the primary drone, streaking down from the darkness. Small, fast-moving, and on a direct intercept course with the cave. Suicide drones. Jester, Viper, you have multiple fast movers inbound. 16 bogeys. Impact in 30 seconds. The comms exploded with shouts. Thorn, inside, get inside, cover the entrance. Rivas watched the red triangles descend. Her kinetic rods, the scalpels, were useless. They were designed for static targets, for surgical strikes, not for 16 agile, jinking aerial threats. Her missiles were too slow to lock. She had one option: the Corvus E-War suite. It was the Falcon's most classified, most experimental system. Not a jammer, but a hard-kill microwave pulse emitter, designed to fry the electronics of enemy systems. It had never been tested against a coordinated swarm. Her fingers flew across the secondary console, arming the Corvus. Jester, brace, firing offensive E-War. The drones dived, committing to their attack run on the cave entrance. Rivas triggered the pulse. A high-pitched scree filled the cockpit. A sound felt more in her teeth than her ears. The Falcon shuddered as the emitters discharged. On her screen, 2 of the red triangles vanished, their systems fried. A third tumbled, out of control. But the other 13 kept coming. It's not working. It's not cycling fast enough. The Corvus suite was designed for single, high-value targets. The swarm was overwhelming its targeting solution and its power reserve. A system alert flashed. Corvus overload. Cycle rate failure. 10 seconds to impact. Thorn's men were firing uselessly into the sky with their rifles. Rivas didn't think. She acted. Her hand slammed onto the emergency power distribution panel to her right. She bypassed 3 safety lockouts, her fingers finding the manual shunt for the auxiliary power. She rerouted power. She pulled it from non-essential systems: avionics stabilization, internal heating, and finally, the primary oxygen mix. The cockpit lights flickered. The steady, comfortable warmth of the cabin vanished, replaced by an instant biting cold at 40,000 feet. Her oxygen mix thinned. Her first breath was shallow, tasting of tin. The Corvus power gauge spiked, jumping into the red. Come on. She triggered the pulse again. This time, there was no sound, just a silent, overwhelming wave of energy. The Falcon dropped 100 feet, its systems buckling under the strain. On her screen, the remaining 13 red triangles vanished simultaneously, wiped from the sky. The comms were silent. Rivas gasped, pulling against the sudden, suffocating tightness in her chest. The smell of ozone and hot metal filled the cockpit. Black spots danced in her vision, hypoxia. She quickly rerouted power back to life support, tearing at the constriction. Thorn's voice, hesitant, broke the silence. Viper, status? Are they gone? Rivas couldn't answer. She was too busy fighting for her next breath, the plane shuddering around her. The power core, taxed beyond its limits, began to fluctuate, a new, critical alarm screaming for her attention. The battle was won, but the aircraft was dying. Every alarm in the cockpit screamed at once. The power core, ravaged by the E-War pulse, was fluctuating wildly. The flight stick shuddered in her grip, the Falcon struggling to maintain altitude. But the real enemy was the hypoxia. The black spots in her vision were coalescing, her thoughts turning thick and slow. She had restored life support, but the damage was done. She was flying on borrowed time, her lungs burning, her head splitting. She turned the Falcon east toward Kandahar, 70 clicks. A lifetime. The simulation failure returned, vivid and suffocating, The red mission failed text, the digital ghost on her screen. This time she was the ghost, the failing system, the unresponsive pilot. No, she would not lose this bird. A new warning blared, this one synthesized, female, and terrifyingly calm. Warning, pilot unresponsive, ejection imminent. The system thought she was incapacitated. It was saving her. In 10 seconds, the canopy would blow and the seat would fire, leaving the multi-billion-dollar prototype to crash into the mountains. The enemy would have the wreckage. The program would be over. Eject! 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 The automated voice was deafening. Her vision tunneled. The countdown timer appeared on her HUD. 0:00:08. Her numb fingers fumbled for the override panel. The switch was recessed, protected by a spring-loaded safety cover, designed specifically to prevent what she was about to do. 0:05. She jammed her thumb against the cover, flipping it open. 0:04. She pressed the button. The alarm stopped. The countdown vanished. Silence. The act was irreversible. She had just manually countermanded the last safety measure. She was now physically strapped to a dying, unstable aircraft. There was no escape. She and the Falcon were now one entity, united in their fate. She focused on the horizon, a faint gray line in the darkness. Fly the plane. Just fly the plane. The airframe vibrated, a low structural groan that promised disintegration. She fought the stick, her movements sluggish, her limbs heavy as lead. The lights of Kandahar airfield appeared, a smear of orange in the black. Too far. She wasn't going to make the runway. She saw the perimeter fence, the dirt, the flat expanse of desert just short of the tarmac. It was enough. She dropped the landing gear. A grinding noise screamed through the fuselage. The left gear indicator flashed red. Failed. She didn't care. She cut the engines, aiming for the dirt. The Falcon hit the ground hard, a controlled crash. The right gear snapped. The aircraft slewed sideways, the belly armor tearing a trench in the hard-packed earth, a grotesque symphony of tortured metal. It slid to a stop, bathed in the sudden blinding glare of crash crew floodlights. The cockpit was dead, silent, dark. The canopy didn't blow. It was forced open from the outside, the hiss of hydraulics cutting the silence. Cold, fresh air hit her face. She tasted the blood from her nose. A face appeared in the opening, silhouetted against the lights. Kalen. His face was a mask of panic. Then, another figure standing just beyond the ring of light. Unmoving. Commander Thorne. He was standing by the tarmac, watching. His face was unreadable in the dark. A statue of silent judgment. She saw him, and then the black spots finally consumed her. The debrief room was windowless, sterile, and lit by a humming fluorescent panel that cast everything in a sickly green-white. Rivas sat at one end of the polished metal table. A fresh line of stitches pulled at the skin over her right eyebrow, a souvenir from the crash. She felt hollowed out, the adrenaline gone, leaving only a bone-deep exhaustion. The FOB commander, a full-bird colonel she'd never met, paced the room. Kalen stood by the main display, his face pale, his anger vibrating just beneath the surface. "Major Rivas," the colonel began, his voice deceptively mild. "You are grounded. Pending a full investigation, you are not to go within 50 feet of the hangar or what's left of your aircraft." Rivas said nothing. Her hands rested on her knees, perfectly still. "You fried the E-War suite, Major," Kalen cut in, his professionalism cracking. "That was not a power surge. You bypassed 3 core safety protocols. You treated a $2 billion asset like a hot rod. The core is slagged. The system is gone." He saw the Falcon's destruction as a personal failure, his failure, and he was laying it at her feet. Rivas wanted to defend her actions. She wanted to explain the swarm, the cycle rate failure, the impossible choice between a dead aircraft and a dead SEAL team. But the words wouldn't come. The military hierarchy, the sterile judgment of the room, her own nature, it all conspired to silence her. She was a pilot, not a politician. Her defense was in her actions, and those actions were now being dissected as criminal. She had failed the program, the one thing she had dedicated her life to protecting. The colonel leaned forward, his hands flat on the table. "You were given one directive, Major, MCON. You violated it. You were given ROE on CDE. You ignored a direct order from the ground force commander for a strike. And then, you stole and destroyed a classified national asset. Do you have anything to say for yourself?" The silence stretched, heavy and judgmental. The hum of the lights seemed to grow louder. Rivas met his gaze. "No, sir." The colonel shook his head, a look of profound disgust on his face. He was about to speak again when the door hissed open. Commander Thorne entered. He was still in his salt-stained, filthy combat gear. He looked exhausted, but his presence seemed to bend the light in the room around him. He ignored the colonel. He ignored Kalen. He walked directly to the table and looked at Rivas. She saw no smile, no gratitude, no warmth. His face was a mask of cold, hard fact. He tossed a small black data chip onto the table. It slid across the polished surface and stopped directly in front of her. The click of plastic on metal was the only sound. "My after-action report," Thorne said, his voice a low rasp. "Jester team's helmet cams, the drones, they were surgical. We were outnumbered 20-1. She saved my team." He didn't defend her insubordination. He didn't excuse her destruction of the Falcon. He simply stated a fact. The colonel's eyes moved from the chip to Thorne, his anger suddenly colliding with the undeniable validation from the ground force commander. The energy in the room shifted, from prosecution to confusion. Thorne held Rivas's gaze for 1 second longer. His eyes, once so full of skepticism, now held something different. Respect. Absolute. Then he turned and walked out. The colonel stared at the data chip. He didn't pick it up. He looked back at Rivas, his expression now uncertain. "You're grounded, Major. Get out of my sight." Rivas stood. As she reached the door, Thorne's voice came from the hallway just loud enough for her to hear. "They're moving my men to a new exfil, LZ Kilo. The terrain is worse." It wasn't small talk. It was intel. He was talking to her, the grounded pilot. A cold dread settled over her, heavier than the verdict. Why was he telling her? She wasn't in the cockpit. It was a sterile kind of torture. Rivas sat in the back row of the CIC, a ghost in her own flight suit, ordered to observe and stay silent. The colonel had put her there as a pointed humiliation, a reminder of her grounded status. The main screen was dominated by a grainy, top-down video feed. A MQ-9 Reaper, call sign Ghost 1, was now providing overwatch for Jester Team. Its optics were powerful, but it was just an eye. It lacked the Falcon's fused sensor suite. It couldn't smell electronic signatures or feel radar emissions. It was half-blind. "Jester, this is Ghost 1. The Reaper pilot's voice crackled, distant and tinny. "LZ Kilo is 2 clicks. You're 12. I have eyes on. LZ appears cold. I see no movement." Thorne's voice was weary. "Copy, Ghost. Moving." Rivas leaned forward, her eyes ignoring the main video feed. She was watching the spectrum analyzer and the regional SIGINT feed on a secondary monitor, the data the Reaper pilot was ignoring. Cold? The LZ wasn't cold. It was silent. A tactical silence. Her eyes scanned the data. No enemy comms chatter. No active radar. Nothing. It was the same two clean signature she'd seen before the drone ambush. Thorne's intel prickled at the back of her neck. The terrain is worse. Why? She pulled up the topographical map, cross-referencing it with the SIGINT feed. LZ Kilo was a natural basin, low ground, but surrounding it, masked by the terrain, were ravines. Dead ground, invisible to the Reaper's high-angle optics. And in that dead ground, the SIGINT feed showed faint, intermittent power signatures. Vehicle batteries. They weren't just infantry. They were waiting. Ghost One, this is Viper, she said, her voice low but clear, not touching the comms, speaking to the air. Request you scan the ravines north and east of the LZ, dead ground. The Reaper pilot, headphones on, didn't hear her. The CIC controller glanced back, annoyed. Major, be silent. On the main screen, Jester team began their final approach, moving out of the rocks and into the open basin. Ghost One, LZ is clear, the pilot's voice declared. Jester, you are green to pop smoke. The words hit Rivas like a physical blow. The simulation. The red screen. Not again. She saw it. The power signatures in the ravines spiked, turning from passive battery to active ignition. They're powering up. She stood. No. She crossed the room in 3 strides, shoving the stunned controller aside. She grabbed his microphone headset, yanking it on. Abort! Jester! Abort! She shouted, her voice tearing through the calm net. Ghost One, this is Viper. You have masked units. Vehicle-mounted anti-air, ZSUs, in the dead ground. Grid 419-552. They are powering up. Break! Break! The CIC erupted. The colonel was on his feet, his face purple. Major, get her off that comm. MPs! The Reaper pilot's confused voice. Viper, who is this? The LZ is cold. It's a trap, Rivas screamed, watching the icons flood the map. Thorne, get back in the rocks. Get back! A heavy hand grabbed her shoulder, spinning her around. An MP. It was too late. The air defenses opened up. The ravines lit up, not with small arms, but with the terrifying rhythmic thump-thump-thump of 23mm cannons. Tracers filled the Reaper's camera feed, a storm of green light. The feed went to static, a high-pitched screech. Ghost One is hit! Ghost One is down! The net dissolved into chaos. Jester team was trapped, caught in the open. Rivas heard Thorne's voice, not in command, but in desperation. Pinned! We are pinned! We're taking heavy fire! We need air! God! Where is Viper? The MP had her by both arms, dragging her backward. She watched the tactical display, a sea of red icons converging on Jester's 6 green ones. She was watching her nightmare come true, and she was chained to the floor. The MP's grip was firm, bruising. Major, you're coming with us. The colonel wants you confined to quarters. Rivas didn't fight. She didn't speak. She let them lead her out of the CIC, her mind cold and sharp, processing the last desperate words from Thorne. We need air. God, where is Viper? She was a ghost, a grounded pilot, a failure watching her worst nightmare unfold on a screen. As the 2 MPs escorted her past the mess hall, she turned, not toward her quarters, but toward the hangar bay. Ma'am, your quarters are this way, the first MP said, tugging her arm. I need to see my aircraft, Rivas said, her voice a flat monotone. I need to assist Kalen with the AAR. Our orders are clear, Major. Rivas stopped, She turned and looked at the young airman, her gaze so void of emotion, so full of cold, compressed intent, that he instinctively took a step back. "Take me to the hangar," she commanded. It wasn't a request. The MPs hesitated, caught between the colonel's order and the absolute, terrifying certainty radiating from her. They followed. The hangar was a tomb, lit by emergency work lights. The Falcon sat in the center, a wounded beast. Kalen was on a scaffold, running diagnostics on the slagged E-War panel. He saw her, flanked by the MPs, and his face hardened. "I told the colonel, no one comes near it, especially not her." "Kalen," Rivas said, walking past the MPs who stayed uncertainly at the hangar door. She walked directly to the cockpit ladder. "Elena, don't." Kalen scrambled down the scaffold, blocking her path. His voice was pleading. "It's over. You can't. It's not airworthy. The core is unstable, the gear is destroyed. You'll kill yourself." She stopped, inches from him. She looked at his pale, frantic face. She saw his fear, his professional pride, his genuine concern. She didn't plead, she didn't argue, she stated a fact. "You and I both know the core is stable, Kalen," she said, her voice a quiet, lethal whisper in the echoing hangar. "The gear is broken." She paused, holding his gaze. "I'm not planning on landing." The words hung in the air. The implication was absolute, a one-way trip. Kalen's eyes widened. He saw it then. Not insubordination, not anger, but a pure, terrifying, sacrificial logic. He saw the end of the equation. She did not wait for his permission. She simply brushed past him. He didn't help her, but he didn't stop her. He didn't call the MPs. He just stood there, paralyzed by the sheer, quiet fortitude of her decision. He stepped aside. Rivas climbed the ladder. The MPs, finally realizing what was happening, shouted, running for the ladder. "Major, stop! Step away from the aircraft!" Rivas ignored them. She dropped into the seat, her hands flying across the console, her movements precise, economical. The pre-flight sequence was muscle memory. Power on. The turbine spooled, a low, rising whine that was a sound of pure defiance. The hiss of the canopy ceiling cut off the MP's shouts. She taxied the damaged Falcon out of the hangar, ignoring the flashing red lights from the control tower, ignoring the radio calls screaming for her to stop. The aircraft dragged its broken wingtip, scraping a shower of sparks across the tarmac as it turned toward the runway. The Falcon screamed down the runway, its broken gear casting a plume of sparks. Rivas slammed the throttle into afterburner. The damaged airframe protested, a violent shudder that threatened to tear the wings off before she even left the ground. She pulled back on the stick. The aircraft leapt into the air, clawing for altitude, heavy and unbalanced. The red gear failure warning blared. She ignored it. The ZSU cannons thumped in her memory, a rhythm driving her forward. She pushed the Falcon to its absolute limit, flying low, a missile aimed at a coordinate. The noise in the cockpit was deafening, a symphony of tortured metal and alarms she refused to acknowledge. 60 clicks vanished in minutes. She burst over the final ridgeline, dropping into the basin of LZ Kilo. The world dissolved. She wasn't flying into a battle, she was flying into hell. The high G turned to avoid the mountainside crushed her lungs, blurring the world outside the cockpit into a green-black smear. Alarms screamed, a polite fiction. The real threat was the chaos on the comms. Green tracers from 4 ZSU-23s stitched the dark, creating a web of steel that Jester Team was trapped beneath. Above them, 6 enemy helicopters, Hind gunships, were circling like vultures, pouring rocket and cannon fire into the rocks where Thorne's men huddled. Static. Pop. Jester 4 is hit. He's hit. Viper, this is Jester. Thorne's voice, not a commander's, but a man's, ragged and broken. We are Winchester on Stinger. I say again, Winchester. We have 6 bogies inbound. Hot. Where is your support? The voice was rough, seasoned, and edged with a controlled panic that tightened her grip on the stick. The skepticism was gone, replaced by a desperate, dying hope. She ignored the tactical data link, already saturated. Her systems were tracking 19 hostile signatures, not 6. The simulation failure was gone. The Colonel's anger was gone. Kalen's betrayal. It was all just noise. There was only the problem. Jester, Viper, stand by, she managed, her own voice betraying nothing, not even the spike of adrenaline that tasted like copper. She leveled the experimental craft, a broken ghost in the middle of a firing squad, a new tone locked in her helmet. Missile launch. Not at her. At the ground team. She didn't ask for clearance. She thumbed the release. The aircraft didn't fire. It released a silent countermeasure. The last charge from the damaged Corvus suite that bloomed like dark ink, swallowing the missile's tracking. The missile detonated harmlessly against the cliff. A momentary, stunned silence fell over the net. Rivas looked at the battle space, the ZSUs pinning them down, the Hinds preparing for the killing blow. Ground or air? She chose both. She rerouted the last of the Falcon's failing power. She bypassed the safeties, the protocols, and the ROEs. She armed the dominance protocol, the weapon she was forbidden to use, the direct neural interface. Then she spoke, her voice lethally calm, a whisper in the chaos, a promise. Jester, clear the net, going offensive. Rivas closed her eyes for a fraction of a second. The click was not audible. It was a feeling, a synaptic connection. The dominance protocol engaged. The chaotic scream of the cockpit vanished, replaced by a cold, sterile silence. The alarms, the warnings, the shouts on the net, all of it was compressed into simple, manageable data streams overlaid directly onto her vision. Her mind became the battle space. She was no longer a pilot in a machine. She was the machine. She perceived the 6 Hind gunships not as helicopters, but as interconnected threat vectors. She didn't think fire. She thought solution. Her gaze snapped to the lead Hind. The Falcon's systems, slaved to her optic nerve, achieved a weapons lock before her eyes had even finished focusing. Solution. The aircraft didn't wait for her thumb. It launched. A single micro-missile, silent and smokeless, streaked from an internal bay. She was already looking at the second Hind. Solution. And the third. Solution. In the span of 4 seconds, the Falcon released 6 missiles, 1 for each gunship. It was a ripple fire dictated not by a computer algorithm, but by the speed of her thought. The sky above Jester Team blossomed into 6 silent, expanding fireballs. The aerial threat was neutralized before the first piece of shrapnel hit the ground. She felt nothing. No triumph. Just processing. Next threat. The 4 ZSUs on the ground turned their attention to her. Their 23mm cannons opening up, filling the air with a wall of green tracers. She felt their targeting radars brush the Falcon, a prickling sensation on her digital skin. She didn't dodge. She thought. Blind. The damaged Corvus suite, now fused with her will, responded. It didn't launch a broad pulse. It fired 4 pencil-thin beams of microwave energy, 1 for each ZSU radar array. The tracers went wild, spraying harmlessly into the night sky as the gunners lost their lock. Threat. Degraded. Now, the infantry. They were exposed, scattered, their heavy support gone, staring in disbelief at the sky. This was not a battle. It was an extermination. Rivas released the Falcon's kinetic rod system. The scalpels. She didn't aim. She simply designated the clusters of enemy signatures, her gaze sweeping the battlefield like the hand of God. Target, target, target. The thumps from the weapon bay were a steady, brutal rhythm. Silent tungsten rods rained down, each one striking with the force of a small meteor. There were no explosions, just impacts, and the sudden clinical extinguishing of red icons on her display. It took 90 seconds, from her going offensive call to the last kinetic rod impact. 90 seconds to neutralize an entire armored company. Then, silence. A profound, deafening silence. The radar was empty. The thermal display showed only the cooling wreckage of the Hinds, the slagged ZSUs, and the still cooling forms on the valley floor. Jester's 6 green icons were untouched, flickering in the cave mouth. The click of the protocol disengaging was violent. The world rushed back in. The scream of the wind over the broken airframe. The blaring fuel critical alarm. The pounding, agonizing throb behind her eyes. A white-hot fire of cognitive burnout. Her hand, locked onto the stick, was shaking violently. A raw, metallic taste filled her mouth. Blood. Her nose was bleeding inside her mask. The power had been godlike, terrifying, and it had taken its pound of flesh. A voice crackled over the net, barely a whisper, ragged with awe and terror. It was Thorn. "Jesus! Viper! What is that thing?" Thorn's question hung in the static-filled air, heavy with an awe that bordered on terror. Rivas didn't answer him. She couldn't. The white-hot fire of the neural interface receded, leaving a crippling migraine in its wake. The cockpit, moments ago an extension of her mind, was now just a broken, vibrating cage. The fuel critical alarm was no longer a piece of data. It was a deafening, imminent threat. She had 5 minutes of flight left, at best. The blood from her nose dripped onto the inside of her oxygen mask. A warm, metallic smear. Burnout. Kalen had warned her, the cost of thinking like a god. She watched her tactical display. 2 new friendly icons appeared, Pave-Low 1 and Pave-Low 2. The exfil birds. They were swooping into the basin, no longer afraid of the ZSUs, their landing lights cutting through the smoke. She watched the 6 green icons of Jester teams sprint from the cave and pile into the first helicopter. Her mission was done. Jester was safe. Her fuel gauge flashed, now just a single pulsing red 0. The turbines whined, starving. The comms crackled. Thorn's voice, one last time. He wasn't talking to the Pave-Low pilot. He was talking to her. "Viper, we are green. We're out. Thank you." A pause. He didn't ask her status. He didn't ask her to follow. He didn't ask where she was going. He knew. In that single, unspoken acknowledgement, he confirmed the reality of her choice. She wasn't RTB. She and the Falcon were expendable. Their purpose served. Rivas keyed her mic, but only to cut the channel. She severed the link to Thorn, to the Pave-Lows, to Kandahar. She was alone. With the last of her strength, she pulled the stick, turning the dying Falcon away from the mountains, away from the land. She pointed its nose toward the vast black emptiness of the open ocean. Her thumb moved to the console, flipping the safety cover on the auto-destruct sequence. This was the final protocol: ditching and scuttling. If the Falcon could not be recovered, it must be erased. She set the timer. 3 minutes. The headache was a white fire, blinding her. She looked down at her hands, still locked on the stick. My bird. It was the only regret. This magnificent broken thing. She had proven it worked, and now she had to bury it. The engines sputtered, coughed, and died. The Falcon was a glider now, falling in the dark. She reached up, her movement slow, wooden. Her glove found the canopy jettison lever. She pulled. With an explosive bang, the canopy vanished. The cold, night air ripped into the cockpit. A brutal, screaming vortex that tore the breath from her lungs. The beep of the destruct timer quickened. 30 seconds. She was falling, alone in the dark, strapped to a silent, multi-billion-dollar bomb. She put her hands on the armrests, found the yellow and black striped handles, and pulled. The violent, brutal kick of the ejection seat snapped her spine straight, punching her out into the screaming wind, free of the falling airframe. The room had no windows. The walls were a flat, institutional gray, smelling faintly of bleach. The only sound was the low, electric hum of the fluorescent lights recessed in the acoustic tile ceiling. It had been weeks, or maybe months. Time had lost its edges. Major Elena Rivas sat at a bare metal table, her hands folded in her lap. She wore a sterile blue uniform devoid of rank or insignia. She was no longer a pilot. She was a classified asset, a problem to be managed. She had been debriefed indefinitely. Men in dark suits had asked the same questions 1,000 times. They hadn't asked about Jester. They hadn't asked about the ZSUs. They asked about the dominance protocol. They asked about the feeling. She told them nothing. She gave them the clinical readouts. She described the system, not the sensation. The power, the cost, the burnout. That was hers. They couldn't have it. She was not a prisoner, they assured her. She was a patriot, being protected. She felt hollow, but not broken. She had made her choice, accepted the variables, and executed the mission. The equation was solved. This gray room was just the remainder. The click of the magnetic lock on the door was sharp, out of place. The door hissed open. A man stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the bright hallway. He was in his dress uniform, the dark blue, heavy with ribbons and gold braid. Commander Thorne. He wasn't supposed to be there. This was a SCAF, no one without clearance. He stepped inside. The door hissed shut behind him. He didn't look at the two-way mirror on the wall. He didn't acknowledge the men he knew were watching. He looked only at her. His face was clean-shaven. The lines of exhaustion were still etched around his eyes, the cold seawater color she remembered from the briefing room. He said nothing. The silence in the room was absolute, heavier than the pressure of the deep ocean. He walked to the table. His movements were formal, precise. He reached into his pocket and placed a small, mundane object on the metal surface. A single, spent 300 blackout casing. It was scratched, the brass tarnished with soot and powder burns. A relic from the siege at LZ Kilo, a piece of the battle. Rivas stared at the casing. Thorne didn't speak. He didn't have to. A medal was paper. A ribbon was cloth. This was a token, an unspoken gesture of ultimate respect. A challenge coin, earned in fire and acknowledged in silence from one warrior to another. It was proof. It was real. He met her gaze. His eyes, once so full of contemptuous skepticism, now held a different kind of quiet. A shared understanding, respect, absolute. He had seen. He knew. The men behind the glass did not matter. The grounding did not matter. The end of her career did not matter. This piece of brass, this silent acknowledgement from the man she had saved, was the only validation she would ever need. Thorne held her gaze for 1 second longer. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. Then he turned and was gone. The door clicked shut, sealing her back inside her gray world. Elena Rivas sat alone in the humming silence. She reached out and picked up the casing. It was still warm from his hand. She closed her fist around the brass casing. The metal was solid, real, a grounding point in the sterile gray. The warmth seeped into her palm, a spark of life in the administrative tomb. The hollow feeling that had lived in her chest since the crash didn't vanish, but it settled. It found its place. The men behind the mirror would eventually stop their questions. The committees would file their reports. They would classify her actions: insubordination, reckless endangerment, destruction of a multi-billion-dollar national asset, violation of protocol. They were all correct in their own clinical way. They saw the debit column, the cost. But Thorne had seen the other side of the ledger. He had seen the solution. He had walked into their sterile room of judgment and placed the counterweight on the table, a single scratched piece of brass that said, 6 lives, my team, my life. This, she realized, was the true nature of their profession, the quiet fortitude that held the world together. It was never about the glory. Glory was loud. Glory was for parades and headlines. Fortitude was quiet. Fortitude was the silence in the cockpit at 40,000 feet, flying a holding pattern while waiting for others to move. It was the refusal to fire on a target containing non-combatants, even when screamed at. It was the agonizing wait while a sensor screen stayed black, trusting that your discipline was stronger than your anxiety. It was the choice to strap oneself to a dying machine to see the mission through. The Falcon was gone. Her career as a pilot was over. She had flown the most advanced weapon in human history, unleashed its godlike, terrible power, and her reward was this: a gray room and a spent shell. It was a perfectly balanced exchange. The message of her story was not that sacrifice would be publicly rewarded, but that the integrity of the sacrifice was the reward. The validation was not a medal pinned to her chest by a general, but a piece of brass pressed into her hand by a warrior. True strength was not the power to destroy. It was the discipline to control that power, and the courage to accept the consequences when that control had to be broken for the right reason. The door would open again. Not today, perhaps not tomorrow. They wouldn't let her fly. She knew too much. She was too much. But they wouldn't waste her. Kaylin would need someone to analyze the burnout data from the dominance protocol. The designers of the next Falcon, the X-03, would need someone to write the code for the interface, someone who understood the cost, who had felt the white-hot fire of that neural link and returned. She would not be a ghost, a forgotten pilot in a classified file. She would be the architect. She would work in another quiet room, ensuring the next person who sat in that cage would be safer, stronger, and better. She opened her hand, looking at the casing. The warmth was fading, but the sharp, circular impression it left in her palm remained. It was enough.